probably one of the more familiar stories in the Old Testament today. David and Bathsheba. And I know that this is familiar to all of us, and you probably have a lot of things that you would like to say, comments that you would like to share, and I want to hear those. So I'm going to facilitate some discussion today, but I want to hear what you have to say about this story. Well, let's make sure we understand that the story of David and Bathsheba follows right on the stories that we've been reading in chapter 10 about the wars and the battles that David has been fighting in against surrounding nations, the Ammonites and the Syrians. And so as you go through chapter 10, and we're not going to do that, Matt has already led that. Thank you, Matt, for covering class for me last week while I was gone. But right after that, then chapter 11 and verse 1 says, then it happened in the spring. Now, the wording there makes you think that some time has passed, right? It happened in the spring. But this is coming right on the heels. I don't think that this is, years later or anything. This is something that's happening right on the heels of these battles in chapter 10. And chapter 11 and verse 1 begins by telling us that David has stayed in Jerusalem. At the end of verse 1, these other battles are mentioned, right? So verse 1, at the time when kings go out to battle, that's what happens in the spring, you don't fight battles in the winter, right? The harshness of winter makes it difficult for you to go in and engage in battle. So in the spring, when the weather is warmer, kings go out to battle. David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the sons of Ammon. Okay, that's the enemy that they were fighting in chapter 10. And so these two chapters have happened within close proximity to each other. So David, instead of going out to battle, like all of the other kings traditionally do, he stays in Jerusalem. And when he stays in Jerusalem, that sets him up for an opportunity to do evil. Now, that's not why he stayed in Jerusalem. In fact, there is some indication later in this book, in chapter 21, where David's soldiers are going to plead with him to stay in Jerusalem while they go out and engage in battle. They pled with him to stay in Jerusalem on that occasion. Maybe they did that to him here. I don't know why he stays. But he stays in Jerusalem while the battle is going to take place, and Joab, the leader of his forces, is going to go out and fight. So verse 2, when evening came, David arose from his bed, and he walked around on the roof of the king's house, and from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful in appearance. And so David sent and inquired about the woman, and one said, is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? So David sent messengers and took her, and when she came to him, he lay with her. And when she had purified herself from her uncleanness, she returned to her house. The woman conceived, and she sent and told David. Test. What happened? Okay. So let's finish verse 5. Now, the day for me to lose the mic is not today. The woman conceived, she sent and told David and said, I am pregnant. All right. There's a lot that we could talk about here. Thank you, gentlemen. There's a lot that we could talk about here. David is up in his palace. Now, do you remember from a few weeks back talking about the location of David's palace? Why is that important when we come to this story? Christine, you're nodding your head like you know the answer. So go ahead. He's up high. Yeah, he can see all of the old city of Jerusalem, what we know as Old Jerusalem. He can see all of that when he is up on his rooftop. And so this is probably, I don't know this for certain, but this is probably something that David could have potentially seen on a regular basis. I mean, people spending time on the rooftops of their houses, right? This is a time where you don't have air conditioning or anything like that. So for comfort, people would oftentimes use the flat roof of their house as a place to relax, go out, enjoy the nice cool breeze, and escape the heat and the stagnation of the air inside the house. This is something that happened regularly in Jerusalem in the ancient world. They don't get as much rain there as we get, and so flat roofs, that's the way they build houses there, okay? So David can see everything from the location of his house, and he sees Bathsheba bathing. Now, I've read in some commentaries and some different things that say, well, Bathsheba shouldn't have been up there taking a bath and putting herself in a position where David could have seen her and all that. Listen, just taking a bath. I really don't think she's doing anything wrong here, okay? This is just the customary thing. Now, is it unfortunate, the circumstances and what happened? Yes, of course it is. But she's just taking a bath. I don't think she's doing anything at fault here. You may disagree with me about that, but I've read all the arguments in favor of that position, and I just don't find them very compelling. But David sees Bathsheba, and she's taking a bath, and the problem is not that David saw her. The problem is that David kept seeing her, right? He kept watching her, and he was visually attracted to her. She's a very beautiful woman, the text says, and so David wants to inquire of her. And so let's start with this. What's the first thing that David ought to have done? Go back inside, right? Yes. Put a blindfold on, right? You have no right to see this woman. Hey, the circumstances happened. You saw her. You didn't go up to your rooftop so that you could see her, but it happened. What David ought to have done is, I need to give that woman some privacy. I'm going to go back into my house, and I'm going to go, work on some official kingly documents or something. I don't know. Get out of the situation. That's what Joseph did when Potiphar's wife came after him. Get out of the situation. That's what David should have done, but that's not what he did. He lingers, he continues to look, looks give birth to lust, and now David's going to start putting forth a plan. What's the second thing David does? What's the next problem you see? He asks about her, which, potentially is not necessarily a problem, but it becomes a problem once he gets the answer. Hey, she's the wife of another man. Okay, end of story. Shut it down right there. That's what should have happened. That's not what he does. But she's not just the wife of any person. Whose wife is she? One of David's fighting men. One of his leading mighty men. You remember talking about David's mighty men in previous classes? These guys are the best soldiers on the earth, right? These are the ones who could, shoot the hair off a frog with a stone from a mile away, right? These guys are David's best soldiers. You guys didn't know frogs had hair, did you? These are the best soldiers in Israel. And that just makes the betrayal of the story even worse. So David inquires. He finds out whom Bathsheba is married to. But he doesn't stop there. Verse 4, he sent messengers to her, and she came to him, and they had relations together, and then, of course, she's going to get pregnant. Now, there's all kinds of things that we could comment on this. Red flags should be going up all over the place for David, but he's not doing that. He is not acknowledging those. Joe and I were talking a day or two ago. Deer season is coming up, and I don't even know why we were talking about this, because neither Joe nor I hunt. But we know that that's coming, and we were talking about, Joe made the comment about, like a deer, like a buck in heat, right? And when a buck is in heat, you can't deter his thoughts for anything. He has one thing on his mind, one thing only, and he will act stupid when he's in heat, okay? Well, that's pretty much what David's doing right now. He is ignoring all the red flags. He is focused on one thing. And isn't it sad, but isn't it true, that the great men and women of Scriptures, the great heroes that we look up to in the Scriptures, they have flaws too. They do things that are wrong, just like I do, just like you do. The Bible is a story about people. And people, whether it's people today or people 3,000 years ago, we're no different. People are people. And the Bible helps us see all human beings have strengths and weaknesses, and the devil will play on those weaknesses every opportunity that he has. All right, before we move on to the next several verses, what have you got? You got anything you want to add? I don't know. Yeah, you would think that, Uriah and Bathsheba might have come to the David's Mighty Men company picnic, and they would have known each other, and, you would think so, right? But, the text does say that David inquired about, he had to ask, who is that? I don't know all that, but I understand where you're coming from, Wade. You would think that he would have known some things about her. You would especially think, even if he didn't, once he found out who she was, he puts a stop to the whole thing, but he doesn't. Yeah, no matter whose wife she is, she's a wife of somebody, but how much more when it's one of your own close soldiers? Yeah, that's right. Good. What else? Jimmy?
I was going to say, kind of to that point, and again, this is pure speculation, but it says, in the evening he got up and was walking around.
Cooler in the day.
It could have been dark. It could have been darker.
Yeah.
Even if he had met her before, he might not have recognized her.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Matt?
I still think verse 1 says a lot when it comes back to him staying in Jerusalem. About a chapter later, one of his generals is pretty irritated with him for not being there. Basically says, look, I'm going to keep this city for myself. I think David is in not a great place here for some reason. Maybe he feels like he's on top of the world, he's been very successful, whatever that is, but clearly he should have been out with his men to begin with. He's kind of forgotten what that's like because of what he does to Uriah, because of, I don't know, a lot of things. So it's odd that he's acting out, from
yeah, I agree. And what is it that has led David to that point? I don't know. But what we clearly see from this moment, this is a critical point in the biblical story. This episode changes the trajectory of David's life, right? His children are going to have problem after problem. And those problems of his kids become David's problems, okay? And it all comes back to this moment, okay? Glenn?
If he had followed through with what he should have been doing out with the troops and stuff, he would have been tired in the evening. He would have been asleep rather than resting all day, getting up at night and whatever.
Yep. He should have been otherwise occupied. Yeah. All right. Okay, so let's keep going now. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you for waving. Yes, I appreciate that. Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to say, I'm sure most of us have known someone who has left the church because their hero in the church has fallen.
Yeah.
And that's so sad because as humans, we will fail. And it's so sad to see people leave because of a human error.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. I'm glad you said that. And that was one of that entered my mind earlier when I used the word heroes of the Bible.
Yeah.
But I didn't go there, and I'm glad you reminded me of that. But what we have to understand about that is our faith is not in people. Our faith is in the Lord. And he doesn't let us down, right? We may have heroes in life, men and women that we look up to for their godly example or their knowledge or whatever the case may be. But when they fall, our faith is not in those people. Our faith is in the Lord. But that's a great point. Thank you for saying that. Yes?
He fell victim to 1 John 2:16, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the
Sure.
lust of the mind.
Yeah.
And it just made me think of that.
Yes.
It's so great that he had the pride of life, and then he fell victim to
Good. The comment was 1 John 2 and verse 16 talks about the things that are in the world, the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and boastful pride of life. And you can see elements of all of those here in this story. All right. So David is going to find a way to cover. Oh, yes. We are not going to get through chapter 11 today, and that's okay. Yes.
What did you think Bathsheba's father blame too? Why would she be bathing that time of day on a roof? And she was sure she knew who David was and where his palace was, that somebody could be watching over them.
Yeah, so, I commented a little bit about that earlier. I don't place the blame on her for taking a bath. Like, bathing on the rooftop was a pretty normal thing. When you do get rain, that's where it's going to collect. And so it's simpler to collect the water on the rooftop, and so you bathe where the source of the water is. I don't think she's doing anything to try and seduce anybody here. I really think she's just taking a bath. Now, where I do find blame with Bathsheba is not in taking a bath, but in going into the king's court and agreeing to have relations with David. I do find blame with her there, but not in the bath. Now, and let me offer this as well. I've read people and I've seen things that are particularly of a certain persuasion that will say, well, you know, this is a rape of Bathsheba, that David raped her because he's the king and this was a power move. He power rapes Bathsheba. Of course she said yes. He's the king. Who could say no to the king? He could have killed her and those kinds of things. I'm just not convinced by that. Not at all. And I mean, if you look at chapter 13, you see the story of a half-sister. It's a true story of rape. And Tamar is resisting that as much as she can. There is nothing in the text that indicates Bathsheba resisted this at all. And so I'm just not convinced by that. You might be, but I am not at this point. Yes, sir.
I haven't read any version of the Bible that said Bathsheba was naked. I mean,
Well, do you take a shower with your clothes on?
she could have been sponge bathing or washing her hair, or she may not have been totally naked.
Okay, well, okay, that's possible. But she's clearly in a some kind of birthday suit ensemble that catches David's attention. There's no doubt about that. Okay, Kelly.
Look, I just go back to the fact that never once does the Bible call on Bathsheba as it being her sin.
That's true, but
It never points out she was doing anything wrong. It didn't. It specifically says you're the man to David later on.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I get uncomfortable when we just start making assumptions that this, that, or the other when the Bible just doesn't lay the blame on her.
I don't disagree that Bible doesn't blame her. I agree with that. She's also not the main character of the story. We've been tracking David's life for an entire book now. And I still go back to Tamar in chapter 13. There's certainly no blame placed on her. In fact, the story goes to quite the opposite, to say, no, this is all on Amnon. And so I think if this was truly a story of rape, as it was in chapter 13, I think the text would read differently about David. It would have said some of the same things about David that it did Amnon, in the disgusting way that he behaved, right? And it just doesn't say that about David. I think David just gave in to temptation. And can we make an argument to say, for Bathsheba, it's going to be pretty hard to resist the king. There's no doubt about that. I mean, there's the king's palace and the wealth and the things that David had. Yeah, that would have been hard. And so it's not a story of Bathsheba's completely innocent, but it's also a recognition, hey, it would have been really hard to not do what she did in that circumstance. But that doesn't say that she's a terrible person or anything like that. You have the reverse situation in Genesis 39 with Joseph and Potiphar's wife. She's a powerful figure, more so than he is. And he's the servant. She's the master's wife. He resisted. He said, no, I'm not going to sin against God. And he ran away. I think we could make the same argument. Well, Joseph could have given in because, wow, look at what he was invited into, I guess. So I'm not trying to portray Bathsheba as a terrible person by any means. I don't think she was. I just think this is not something where she's completely innocent either. All right. Now, so David has to get rid of this situation. Bathsheba is pregnant. He wants to cover his tracks. And so he calls for his mighty man Uriah the Hittite to come back from the war. And David is going to tell Uriah, take a break, from the war, come back and refresh yourself, go home, spend time with your wife. And if he will do that, if he'll go and be with his wife and be intimate with her, then boy, that's going to remove all of this difficulty from me and we will cover our tracks. But Uriah is a man of tremendous integrity. And he says, I will not go and be refreshed and go to my house and enjoy the comforts of home and be with my wife when my brothers in arms are away fighting. I'm not going to do that. So then David has to try again. And he's going to get Uriah intoxicated and say, well, if I can get him to lower down his inhibitions and his judgment, maybe then he will go and he will be in bed with his wife. But once again, he did not go down to his house, verse 13 says. So now David is going to resort to even more sinister tactics. We've got to find a way to remove Uriah from the situation. And so you know the story. David sends a letter to Joab. Verse 14 says he sent it by the hand of Uriah. Okay, and that is just one of the most difficult things to read in the chapter, right? Uriah is carrying his own death sentence, and he has no idea. He is faithfully executing his responsibilities as a soldier of King David, and he's carrying his own death letters. But Uriah goes back to Joab with these instructions: place Uriah in the hottest part of the battle, and when the battle is intense, completely withdraw all the rest of the troops, leave Uriah there so that he will be surrounded by the enemy and he has no chance of survival, and Uriah is going to be killed by the enemy. And so in verse 22, the messenger said to David, the men prevailed against us and came out against us in the field. We pressed them as far as the entrance of the gate. The archers shot at your servants from the wall, so some of the king's servants are dead, and your servant Uriah the Hittite is also dead. And David is going to send this messenger back to Joab and basically just say to Joab, hey, you win some, you lose some, doesn't always go your way. Don't be discouraged that we lost a lot of soldiers. Don't be discouraged that Uriah is dead. This is just the natural way of war. And so verse 26, when the wife of Uriah heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for her husband. And when the time of mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife, and then she bore him a son. But the thing that David had done was evil in the sight of the Lord. So verse 27, she gives, in verse 27, it says that David makes her his wife, then she bore the son. So we're moving to the better part of a year here now that this story has been unfolding. And then the child is born, but David has clearly done abominable things before God. David, years ago, I counted up one time. I don't remember exactly. I want to say he broke 6 of the 10 commandments in this chapter. Okay? I mean, don't commit adultery, don't murder, don't covet, right? Go on and on. I mean, David just... This is a colossal failure for David. But we come into chapter 12, and I love what the Lord does. The Lord is certainly not pleased with David and all the terrible things that he has done, but chapter 12 and verse 1, the Lord sent Nathan to David. Nathan is one of the prophets. Nathan is an advisor for David. David trusts Nathan. And so Nathan is going to come to David and he is going to talk to him and talk some sense into him. And he does that by this very, very beautiful story, very compelling story. It's a fictitious story that Nathan creates, but it's really a parable of what David has actually done in his own life. So you know the story, I'm sure, so we're gonna skip over that. But I do want to point out one little thing. In verse 3, the poor man who had nothing except one little ewe lamb which he bought and nourished, it grew up together with him and with his children. It would eat of his bread, drink of his cup, and lie in his bosom, and was like a daughter to him. What is that talking about? Bathsheba and her husband Uriah, right? Look at how Uriah cared for his wife, how he nurtured her and loved her, and he was good to her. And I love that it says, the poor man had nothing except this one little ewe lamb. Uriah, what's the most important thing in your life? Bathsheba, my wife. And that just adds even more to the pain of what David has done by betraying his friend and his loyal soldier and taking the one thing that he loved most of all. Now, verse 5, David's anger burned greatly against the man. And he said to Nathan, as the Lord lives, surely the man who has done this deserves to die. The punishment in the law of Moses for adultery. Death. The punishment in the law of Moses for adultery. Death. Like 17 things that David did are all punishable by death. The man deserves to die, and he's exactly right about that. Glenn?
How would David go about making restitution to his family?
Yeah, it would have to be monetary in some sense. I don't know that David actually ever does this, but it would just, yeah, it would have to be monetary. I don't know that David is going to, well, here, take Abigail, take my wife. I took yours, you take one of mine. I don't know that would be on the table. So I would think monetary. All right. So David learns that he is the subject of this story. Now, I want to move on through this. I'm sure there's more that we could say. But notice, Nathan continues just pouring it on. All right, so in verse 8, I also gave you your master's house, your master's wives into your care. I gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if that had been too little, I would have added yet many more things than these. This is the Lord speaking through Nathan. David, I gave you everything. And if that wasn't enough, I would have given you more. I would have compounded that with interest. And yet you went and you took something that didn't belong to you. And in verse 9, why have you despised the word of the Lord? David, what you did despised the word of God. Shame on you for doing this. And so now we need to see at verse 10. Now therefore, the sword shall never depart from your house, because you have despised me and have taken the wife of Uriah to be your wife. And thus says the Lord, I will raise up evil against you from your own household. I will even take your wives before your eyes and give them to your companion, which is what David did. He took Uriah's wife and he brought her to the man who was Uriah's companion, right? And he will lie with your wives in broad daylight. We'll see that this is fulfilled as we move ahead in the chapters. Indeed, you did this secretly, but I will do this before all Israel and under the sun. Jimmy, to your point earlier, it won't be in the evening. It won't be in the relative darkness of the day. David, I'm going to humiliate you in front of the whole nation in broad daylight. Now, a couple things I want us to see. There's some things that Nathan says to David. Verse 10, the sword will never depart from your house. Verse 11, God says, I will raise up evil against you. I'm going to do this, David. This is your punishment, and it's coming from me. And this punishment is going to come, in the next expression, from within your own household. You remember earlier in the class today, I said this is the pivotal moment where everything shifts for David. Every chapter from here on out, David is dealing with family problems, strife, struggle, hatred, bitterness in his own family. And all of it comes back to this episode. Punishments that David has to experience from the Lord. The companion, in verse 11, who will lie with David's wives in broad daylight, that's talking about Absalom, and we're going to see that in a few chapters. Now, on top of all of this, we'll come back to verse 13, but verse 14, the Lord says, by what you did, you've given occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme. This is what people say today. I don't go to church because of all the hypocrites in the church. David was a hypocrite in the church. Okay, that's exactly what God told him. People who are enemies of mine are rejoicing in you because of what you did. And they're blaspheming me and my holiness because of the way that you foolishly behaved. You were a hypocrite. I have sinned against the Lord. That's what Saul couldn't do, right? Samuel would approach Saul and say, you did this thing that was wrong, and Saul would make excuses and he would blame somebody else or come up with some reason as to why he couldn't have done the wrong thing. David doesn't do that. He doesn't shift the blame. He doesn't say, Bathsheba was asking for it. She was wearing a short skirt. No. He says, this is on me. I have sinned against the Lord. I did the wrong thing. And good on David for doing that. Jimmy?
Something I keep thinking about is, that perspective of if David did rape her. And, so David rapes her.
Right.
David kills her husband. Why would she go be his wife?
Okay. I think that's worth considering. Yeah.
You're just kind of like, if it was that way, why, and I guess maybe that whole, fear of what might happen to her.
Right.
But, just thinking about it from that perspective.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Matt?
13 and 14 is a contrast for us all.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. No, you go ahead. Make the point.
It's an amazing statement to me. Forgiveness versus ramifications. Forgiveness of sin does not take away the ramifications from those decisions.
Yeah, that's right.
Of that sin.
So David acknowledges his sin. He admits it. And then, verse 13, I've always thought this was fascinating. Nathan said to David, the Lord has taken away your sin. You shall not die. Remember when David pronounced the judgment? The man who did this deserves to die. And Nathan said, you're right, he does. But God has forgiven you. Now, wait a minute. Why? Why has God taken away David's sin? And he didn't do that to Saul. What's the difference? The difference is the heart that David possesses. David acknowledges his sin. He admits it. He agrees to what God has said through Nathan. And, as we're going to see on Wednesday night, David writes Psalms, Psalm 51 in particular, that show how much he loathes himself for what he has done. And it shows the depths of his sorrow over this. So Nathan leaves David in verse 15, and it says, the Lord struck the child that Uriah's widow bore to David so that he was very sick, and the child is going to die in a short time. Now, the servants, I'm skipping down to verse 21. The servants said to David, what is this thing that you have done? When the child was alive, you fasted and you wept. But now that the child has died, you arise and you eat food. David, when the child was sick, you were fasting and weeping. But now the child has died. You should be fasting and weeping now. Those are the signs of grief. Why are you not grieving now that the child is dead? And David says, while the child was alive, I fasted and wept, for I said, who knows, maybe the Lord will be gracious and the child will live. But now he has died, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? But I love verse 23. I will go to him, but he will not return to me. I love this. My child is dead, but I will go to him. I will see my child again. What do you think David's talking about? He's talking about heaven. My child is in the presence of God for eternity, and I'm going to see him one day. He's not going to come back to this life, but I'm going to see him in the next life. What does that tell us about the condition of young, innocent children who die? Man, we're going to see him in heaven one day, and isn't that a great thing to think about? What a wonderful thing to think about, seeing all of God's children running around in heaven and playing with little puppy dogs. Okay, I don't know about that part. Beautiful thought here expressed by David. All right. Now, God, I want to go back to something Matt said. Forgiveness of sin, which God gives to David, does not take away the consequences of sin, and God does not take those away from David. We've already said that. Future chapters, it's just one terrible story after another. It's like we're back in the book of Judges again when we get into the next several chapters of David's life. There's terrible consequences that flow from this occasion and all the things that David failed in here. You and I can make bad choices in life that come with serious consequences. And we have to live with those consequences. That doesn't mean we can't be forgiven. But that forgiveness does not mean that there's no consequences. Okay? And so this is a story that illustrates that very well, very clearly. And I know that we would say, yeah, but I've never blundered in the way that David did. I've never messed up in the way that David did. Well, maybe not. Maybe I've not had a colossal failure like David did in chapter 11. Perhaps not. But that doesn't mean I don't have any failures. That doesn't mean I don't have any flaws. I have tons of them. And there are consequences to my bad choices, even when I enjoy God's forgiveness. All right, I know there's a lot more we could have said about that, but thank you, everybody.